Okay, I would like to go next. I have
Do
a
it.
segment that I'm calling Sea Monsters Ate My Pals.
Ooh.
So there's a thing that I heard about while fucking around in the dark corners of Reddit, as I do, which is a strange tale of Brian McCleary, Edward Brian McCleary. Have you ever heard about this guy?
I
Eddie Bears. No.
Goes by Brian. This was a story that I first encountered when reading about, somebody posted this thing. They were like, does anybody remember the story about that guy who claimed that him and his friends were attacked by Cecil the sea serpent? And I was like, what? And I looked up Cecil the sea serpent, and Cecil the sea serpent is a famous Hanna-Barbera cartoon who looks like, or maybe it's, hang on, let me make sure. Cecil Sea Serpent. There he is. Beanie and Cecil was the name of the show. And this guy was, long story short, attacked by, it was a Bob Clampett cartoon, P.S., was attacked by this creature that he then drew a picture of, and it looked like Cecil the Sea Serpent, so nobody took him seriously. They were like, all right, kid. But basically, I started doing some research on this, and
Okay.
it's a pretty fucking scary story. I found terrifying if true. I found this guy did a write-up. Let me just find it. RQ. This is on morbidstreak.blogspot.com. And this is from a user name of, let's see, does it show?
Now, a morbid streak is where you go naked through a funeral.
This is by H.R. Taylor. And this was in, they wrote this up. It doesn't say. But anyway, this is what happened. I'm just going to read their post. After some digging, I was able to find the full text of Brian McCleary's article in Fate magazine, May 1965. I took screenshots of it and have included the Imager album in this post for you. You can read it yourself for free on the internet archive, which I'm linking to our listen along in the Discord right now.
Nice. Thank you.
According to Brian McCleary's story, according to Brian McCleary's Fate article, hang on, let me put it in the listen along. There we go. According to Brian McCleary's Fate article, here is his story. On March 24th, 1962, Edward Brian McCleary, age 16, was invited on a skin diving trip by his friend Eric Royal, also age 16. Skin diving just means diving without the use of a respirator.
Oh,
it's similar to free diving.
I thought he was getting asked for a hand job.
He probably
dude, I
was.
thought he was diving from like multiple feet in the air, totally nude.
Well, again, this is the 60s, so it was probably a cover for some sort of skinny dipping scenario. But according to this, that's not what it was. It says, though free diving is more of a competitive sport, it's similar to free diving. Brian says he checked the weather report before agreeing to the trip. The two were joined by Bradford Rice, 14, Warren Felly, 16, and Larry Stewart Bill, 17. They drove to Fort Pickens.
Larry Stewart Bill?
I didn't think I was going to get that one past the goalie. Yeah, that's a weird, those are 3 first names, my friend. You need 1, 2 at a stretch. Anyway, they drove to Fort Pickens State Park, where they entered the waters of Pensacola Bay, heading for the sunken USS Massachusetts, which is located on a sandbar about 2 miles offshore. The boys had a 7-foot Air Force life raft, which they planned to paddle to the ship. It was outfitted with a drift anchor, pockets for provisions, and oars. From the minute he sets foot on the water and continuing throughout the story, Brian stresses the fact that the water was ice cold. The boys took turns paddling so no one would be too tired to dive once they reached the shipwreck. But out on the trip, a storm started to whip up. The sea grew choppier.
Didn't he say he checked the weather?
Yeah, he did.
And they decided to go outfitted without respiratory gear, but they had literally everything else you would need to go see a sunken ship.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they made an error.
This seems insane.
As we will see shortly. You're right. So they have this big life raft. It's very, very cold. They take turns paddling, and then the storm comes in out of nowhere. Storm they weren't expecting.
Okay.
Sea grew choppier. Clouds began to roll in the sky. The wind and waves were pushing the raft out to sea. Eric, Warren, and Brian jumped into the water to push the raft from behind, but were unable to make any progress. So shortly after, they climbed back in. The waves were so high that they now had to hold onto the sides of the raft. The sky was growing darker, and other boats they saw out at sea began to head for shore. They saw a Chris Craft boat entering the channel. Don't know what that is.
Yeah.
They waved at the boat, shouting for help. Mayday. An elderly woman waved back, but the boat did not approach them to help. Brad grabbed the shark gun, tied a red shirt around the tip, and fired it at the boat. The spear landed about 50 feet away from the boat. It was impossible for anyone to miss the distress signal, but the Chris Craft continued on. It's fucked up. At this point, Brian spotted a large buoy and suggested they tie the boat there to wait out the storm. The crew, who are now sitting in a pool of cool water as they were continually swamped by the waves, paddled their rafts toward the buoy. Brian describes the buoy as being 20 feet high. However, a riptide had formed at the base of the buoy, and the boat is sucked under it before the boys can tie the raft to it. Everyone jumps clear of the raft, which is pulled underneath the buoy and then washes free. Yikes. Eric and Brian cling to the sides of the raft as the rest of the boys climb back in. At this point, the sky is black as night, and they are beginning to wash out of the channel past the USS Massachusetts. After a while, quote unquote, I don't know how long, the storm lets up. The rain turns to mist and the ocean is calm, but a fog starts to roll in. It limits their visibility to 25 feet, and the boys decide to wait for the fog to clear. The boys share some cigarettes that miraculously hadn't gotten wet. At this point, the water beneath them becomes unseasonably warm, and the air is filled with the smell of dead fish. They hear a splash and see, quote, what looked to be a telephone pole. It was about 10 feet high with a bulb on top. It stood erect for a moment, then bent in the middle and dove under. The sickening odor filled the air. The boys discuss what it might be. Warren suggests an oarfish. Brian suggests a sea monster. They then hear a high-pitched whine. Panicked, everybody puts on their fins and dives into the water. Patches of brown, crusty slime lay all over the surface. Everyone tries to swim for the shipwreck. The water begins to get colder and the rain rolls in again. I should stress that Brian has described everyone at this point being exhausted, cold, and cramped. They've been swimming for perhaps 30 seconds when Warren cries, hey, help me, it's got Brad, before he too vanishes. Brian is now swimming with Larry and Eric. Boy, you don't want to end up swimming with two guys named Larry and Eric. But has lost sight of Warren and Brad. Then Larry vanishes. Eric and Brian dive for him but see nothing. Eric becomes overcome with cramps and holds onto Brian's neck as he paddles for what he hopes is the shore. It is now described as pitch black, so he can't tell where he's going. After what felt like a couple of hours, lightning flashes and Brian sees the USS Massachusetts. He swims toward it. Eric is pulled off him by a wave, but Brian sees him swimming towards the ship as well. But then, right next to Eric, that telephone pole-like figure broke the water. You could see the long neck and two small eyes. The mouth opened and it bent over. It dove on top of Eric, dragging him under. I screamed and began to swim past the ship. My insides were shaking uncontrollably. At this point, Brian does not remember anything until he washes up on a beach. He finds a quote-unquote tower of some sort, which he climbs and sleeps on the floor. In the morning, he climbs down, but his legs fail him, and he falls to the beach and starts to crawl where some passersby find him. The article published in Fate ends with a short summary of local news reports, which don't match all of Brian's story. One report says Brian drifted and swam more than 2 miles, but Coast Guard and Navy rescue units estimated he swam 5 miles. Doctors at the naval base said he was in the water over 12 hours. The interviewing reporters told Brian their stories would not mention the sea serpent, as it was, quote unquote, better left unmentioned for all concerned. The bodies of Eric Royal, Warren Sully, and Larry Stewart Bill were never recovered. One body washed ashore a week after the incident, and Brian says, to the best of my knowledge, I identified the body as that of Brad Rice.
When he says, to the best of my knowledge, like, because he's not remembering it?
Well, I mean, a week in
because
the
it was,
ocean will
like,
do pretty
slightly
weird shit to a
undeniable
body,
or
probably.
unidentifiable. Okay.
Probably. It goes on to say, I was unable to find confirmation on whether or not this was Brad Rice or why Brian was the one to identify the body. The raft was found 10 miles from where Brian came out of the water. He was picked up near Fort McRae about 7:45 a.m. Sunday, March 1962, March 5th, by a helicopter. All right, a helicopter ride from the Naval Air Station. He had spent the early morning hours in an old gun emplacement, it seems. The clipping further states Brian was suffering from shock and exposure, but was released to his parents after a brief treatment in the Naval Hospital. Brian writes us that after the time of the accident, he had a nervous breakdown, but recovered and was able to resume his life in about 3 months.
Okay, so it was just traumatizing a little bit. He was able to go through life.
Yeah. This says this newspaper article, there's a clipping from the Ocala Star Brenner, confirms that 4 boys were lost at sea. So this happened, you know. And Brian's story of attempting to tie the raft to a buoy is also mentioned. The raft eventually washed ashore on the Gulf with face masks, shoes, and fins still inside. Location. The location is pointed out on a map. There's a couple of the person who wrote this, the poster, comes up with some pretty interesting factual anomalies, things that need to be considered. The weather problem. Other write-ups claim that weather reports did not mention this storm. I was unable to confirm this with my own research, so on and so forth. It was a riptide, some people say. This looks like the most likely answer. They get riptides in that area, but I mean, that doesn't really explain what they saw.
Well, even his story involves the riptides. So that's not like
that's true. It does.
Nobody's trying to deny that.
He can clearly tell the difference. This says the boys' mental state. It is repeatedly stressed throughout the article. The water is freezing. The boys are physically exhausted and are cramping pretty bad. It is entirely possible that the, quote, monster was just a hallucination, and the boys drowned as they tried to swim back to shore after panicking, being swept out to the ocean.
It's also crazy that they saw Natalie Wood on that boat waving before she was dead.
There's a whale theory.
Okay.
Yeah. Baleen whales, sometimes when they breach, they can look a bit plesiosaurish. They have these kind of knobbly beaks on the end of their noses that when viewed from underneath the animal's chin looks something like a creature. They don't eat people. That's a problem. However, the water getting warmer and smelling like fish could be indicative of a krill boil when they chase prey up to the surface.
Okay. Yep.
Stuff like that. This says could easily drown their attempt to escape from the monster. The monster does not eat Eric. It dives on top of him, dragging him underneath. A whale is a massive creature and could easily hurt a human. While whales will generally try to avoid humans, it's possible that they could accidentally dive on top of one while feeding if they didn't know it was there. A whale could also pull a person down if they dive on the when the person is close enough. In their weakened state, the boys could have drowned. The high-pitched whine could have been a whale sound. The mist could have been whale spouting, they say. Some people have suggested that Brian killed them. Some people have said that it is a vicious grouper. But I think in the end, We kind of won't ever know. Whatever happened to Brian? I've read posts that claim that Brian went on to abuse drugs and insist that the sea monster existed. Also posts that say a psychologist who convinced him that the monster was not real. There are no sources to confirm it either way. Edward McCleary died in 2016. Here's a link to his memorial page. Please be respectful and do not contact or harass any of his friends or family. So he's dead. There you have it. That is the strange and somewhat tragic tale of Brian McCleary in a segment that I'm calling Sea Monsters Ate My Friends.
Yeah, that's
damn. That was
crazy.
quite the tale. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking buck wild. It's somebody needs to make a movie pretty prompt about this. I am terrified of the deep. There, it's no secret, but it's just, you know, there are a few things scarier, and you're few places where you're more outclassed by the native fauna than the sea.
Yeah.
The deep, crushing, cold Black Sea.
We're so bad at water as humans, you know, like they're just basic fish tear us apart in terms of skill.
I've been playing Sekiro, which is very good. I've fought all these FromSoft monsters, all of these soldiers and ninjas and shit, and nothing scared me as much as walking past like a lake and being like, that's a new fish I haven't seen before. I'm never going in there because it wants to eat me. And it did. I tried to attack it with a ninja star. Boy, some kind of cybernetic Terminator fish. I'm telling you. Follow me.
Jesus Christ.
Ninja star versus giant fish. Not enough.
Not enough. Not for these ones. Man-eating fish.
Well, let me wrap up this episode then.